Andrew Bridgen, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for giving up the time to come on. I know you haven't got much time, so we'll try and do this as quickly as possible. For the people that don't know who you are, because a lot of my viewers are overseas, I wanted to get you on because you were really the voice for the people inside Parliament during the pandemic in 2020. And as I said to you before we hit record, you were often in that building alone with no support from anybody else. And I wanted you to share your journey with everyone and where this started, what first alerted you to there being something perhaps more nefarious going on.
Well, I didn't get into politics the normal way. I was standing for the Conservative Party in 2010 in a seat that was classed as a no-hoper. I used my own money for the leaflets, not the party's money. I was selected by public vote, an open primary where it wasn't just Conservative members who decided who they wanted to be the candidate. And I wasn't in the system. I was told by David Cameron I wouldn't be an MP and he wasn't going to send any money, and my area would never vote Conservative. In 2010, we only ended up with the second largest swing to the Conservative Party in the country, 12.5% swing. And my majority went up every election. So I was always an outsider. I was the MP that first exposed the Post Office Horizon scandal soon after I arrived in Parliament. Unfortunately for the government, my constituents, Susan and Michael Rudkin, were pivotal to that uh, terrible situation. I also exposed the modern slavery in the garment industry in Leicester. My seat doesn't border Leicester, but people from Leicester came to see me because they knew I'd speak out about the massive injustice of thousands and thousands of people being paid £2.50, £3.50 an hour, miles below the national minimum wage, and working in sweatshop conditions in the fast fashion industry in Leicester. Um, I was against HS2 from the beginning, and opposed that and spoke against it and voted against it for 10 years, saying it was going to be a waste of money and get cancelled. Um,
Sorry, Andrew, to interrupt. Am I right in thinking that actually affected you personally with your own property?
Oh, that was revenge by the government. I've been on the target list for a long time, so I'm the only MP had to sell my house to HS2 or sell their house, their property to HS2, and they tried to put it through my factory as well, my business at the same time, all in northwest Leicestershire. And yes, they that was diabolical. They gave me £500,000 less than the house was worth, and 360,000 less than I'd paid for it 5 years before. Um, and then they deleted what I'd paid off the land registry and put a smear out saying that I'd made a fortune selling my house to HS2, which I took up with the government, and they had no explanation for why what I'd paid for the house many years before had been deleted off the land registry. And then to add insult to injury, they didn't pay the gas bill 6 years after they robbed the house off me, and tried to put that onto my credit rating for £7,500 worth of unpaid gas bills for the old rectory at Appleby Magna, from 6 years after I'd no longer owned it. But they made a mistake and they actually put it on my eldest son's credit rating while he was working in America. And he alerted me and I dealt with it. But he's unfortunately got the same initials as me. And he was 15 when we moved out of that house. He was working in America years later. And they put £7,500 worth of unpaid gas bills for a property that they'd bought 7, 8 years before off me onto my eldest son's credit rating without telling him, so he was unable to rent an apartment in America where he was working.
They've
And you
really
can't
got
make
it
that
in
up.
for you.
You really can't make that up. But that's exactly what happened, and that's what happens when you go against the narrative. The If you don't toe the line, and unfortunately, in the game of politics, uncovered that you win in the game of politics by doing what's good for the party you're representing and the establishment, not for doing what's good for your constituents. And that's where it's terribly, terribly wrong. So unfortunately, again, for the government, when I was young, many, many decades ago, I studied biological sciences at Nottingham University
Mm.
with biochemistry in the first year and specialized in genetics, virology, and behavior. And so I was very interested when the pandemic hit. Um, and my skepticism, MPs were locked down like everyone else in their property. Parliament wasn't working. It was government by diktat. Often the Parliament was only voting on amendments to the restrictions placed on the public a week after they'd actually been implemented. So, I mean, there was no, Parliament wasn't working properly. And what I saw then was disastrous. I'd converted in 12 years by 2019. Northwest Leicestershire was always the poorest part of Leicestershire. We'd made it into the richest part of Leicestershire, but and the happiest place to live in the Midlands, highest economic
Wow.
growth in the country, and the suicide rate was higher in a month of lockdown than the whole year normally. And I wrote to the government and questioned the government in Parliament, and they claimed there was no link between suicide rates and lockdowns. Well, there was in Northwest Leicestershire, and if we were the happiest place to live in the Midlands, it'd have been a lot worse in other places. And that's why we ended up at the end of the lockdowns with 1 million under 25s on waiting list for mental health support. The government were in complete denial. We got round to 2021, and I suspected the government were going to try and lock us down for another Christmas, which would be devastating for people's well-being, health, and also for the economy. Um, and then, of course, I was invited then to various parties in early December 2021. We weren't in lockdown, to drinks parties at Number 10. And I'd got wind that the government were going to try and lock us down. So I refused to go and said, if you're going to take away my constituents' freedoms, I'll be voting against it, speaking against it. And also, it'd be completely inappropriate only a couple of weeks before to have social gatherings if that's your intent. And they sent me invites the first week in December 21, the second week, and then the third week, I refused every one. The third week, then Partygate broke, and I realised what they were doing. They wanted every MP to have been at parties at Number 10 before the story about the parties broke, and I was the one that didn't go because I could see what they were up to, and I spoke with civil servants who were diligent, and there are hundreds and hundreds working Number 10. That's mostly what Downing Street is. It's all a set of offices. And one of them had emailed his supervisor during the lockdowns and said, don't you think we ought to be masking and social distancing in the building since we're inflicting this on the people? With devastating results. And the answer he got in an email from his superior was, well, we've looked at it with the scientists and none of it works.
Oh
But
my God.
but since the cameras are outside, when you leave the building, could you please put your mask on and socially distance as you leave? So it was all a sham. I also spoke with cameramen who had filmed those presentations from Number 10 behind the lecterns where we were told what the rules were for today and how many people had died. And the cameramen were very friendly with me because I did a lot of television while I was an MP for 14 years. And we met at a pub between the lockdowns and I asked them what was going on. They're all contractors. And they said that normally when you go and film something like that at Number 10, there'd be three of you, a producer, a sound man, and a cameraman. And they were told only one person. So it had to be the cameraman. So we had to hump all the gear in, have a negative COVID test. And he said it was all a scam. They all three of them said it was a scam, that they set all up and did everything, and it was all okay and socially distanced in front of the camera. He said, but there were 50 special advisors and young people who work in Number 10 standing, leaning against each other, no masks, no social distancing, right behind the camera. If you'd swung the camera around, you'd have seen it was a pantomime. So then I said that Boris Johnson had got to go because obviously he betrayed the people. I don't believe for 1 minute that he had COVID-19. If he had, they wouldn't have been so lax about what they were doing at Number 10. That was another psyop. And I saw the damage and the number of people had committed suicide in my constituency, and they'd all got blood on their hands. Also, I'd seen the way that scientists and doctors asking reasonable questions about the safety and efficacy of the vaccines or whether the lockdowns and the masking was appropriate. They were just being destroyed reputationally, financially, professionally destroyed. And That's not the way science works, and that's not the way politics should work. And I was offered a bribe in January 2022 of anything I wanted to shut up. Um,
Really?
yes, anything I wanted to shut
Are
up.
you allowed to say who that was from?
A very senior person at number 10 came over to see
Oh,
me, and actually put it in text message to me, the idiot. Um, and I said, well, I was shocked. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you just have to tell us what you want and we get it for you. I said, what, anything I want? And they said, yeah, pretty much, yeah. And I said, well, is that the game we're playing? And he said, that's the game we always play, Andrew. So I said, well, if that's the game we're playing, I know what I want. I want the Prime Minister's resignation letter. Can I have that? And he said no. So I said I didn't want anything else if that was the game we were supposed to be playing. And from then on, it was pretty much war. I'd voted against the masking and the mandates and spoken against Plan B for the Christmas lockdown in 2021. And Boris Johnson ended up going 6 months later. I was the first one to say he got to go, and he went 6 months later. Uh, but we ended up with Rishi Sunak, who was equally bad after the sort of interregnum of Liz Truss for 48 days or 45 days. I can't really remember. Um, and it became clear to me that the government were seeking to vaccinate healthy children under 5 down to 6 months. The Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency were petitioning the government for that. I got wind of that, and I'd seen the Fryman report, the Pfizer and Moderna test data, trial data, which they tried to hide for 75 years, but the American Supreme Court had forced them to release them in 50,000 page batches. And I was working with a team of scientists who were analyzing all of this. And the Fryman papers had come out. According to Pfizer and Moderna's own data, 1 in 800 people were going to have death or a serious life-changing injury. That was in the trial, so they never should have been approved. What I also knew by then, by working with a doctor called Dr. Josh Getchko in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, was that the vaccines that were given approval were never the vaccines that were put in people's arms. They were different vaccines. They were batch two. Um, the original and the proof of that was, if you remember about the vaccine rollout, on the second day of vaccine rollout, the rules were changed and everyone had to stay at the vaccine centre for 15 minutes. That was because of the risk of anaphylactic shock. They didn't do that on day one because they weren't expecting that, because that was never in the trial data. That's because the trial data genetic material was produced by using a PCR test very expensively, very purely, very slowly, whereas the vaccines that went in people's arms were cultured up in bacteria and they had impurities in them, like bacterial cell walls and bacterial plasmid and genetic material contamination, DNA in the messenger RNA vaccines, which were never in the trials. So we think then that the actual vaccines that went into people's arms were at least 5 times more lethal than those that were given approval. So you were down to about where there's never been a fatality from COVID. They were at no risk from COVID. And if the vaccines were effective, which they weren't, I don't want children to be sacrificed to try and protect me or other people. That's not the way society should work. You know, should be making sacrifices for the vulnerable, the elderly, and the children. And that wasn't what was going on. So I could see that the government were going to approve these. So I decided I was going to stand up and stop them. And then first, I realised that the establishment would round on me. I'm not politically naive. So I just went to get allies, and I spoke to a lot of people I thought were my friends in Parliament who I'd been on campaigns with before, like the Brexit vote, and had to go to hospital with chest pains and found out he'd had 2 heart attacks.
oh,
But to
wow.
a man and a woman, another one came to me and told me their sister was paralyzed from the neck down, having taken a booster. Um, but to a man and a woman, nobody would speak out. I don't know what they'd got on them. I begged them to help me. And in the end, I had to stand on my own. And I stood up on the 13th of December 2022, gave a speech on the vaccine safety and efficacy, questioning it. And that stopped the government from being willing to risk pushing those vaccines out to children. But that ended up then with my suspension from the Conservative Party.
Yes.
I went to Grandy's. I was given one last warning in a 1.5 hour meeting where I explained all my concerns about the vaccines and also about NG163. And I was listened to for an hour and a half, and then I was told at the end, in unequivocal terms, in January 2023, there is currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right in 20 years. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world with all the personal risk for you, which that will entail should you decide to continue to do so. And I just got up and said, well, in that case, this meeting's over. I'm out. And I just walked out.
So what do you
I
think?
got I got I got debates on excess deaths. I got experts over from America to Parliament. They sabotaged the meetings in Parliament with the MPs. They had security on the doors. They sabotaged the IT so we couldn't even play videos or have video links. That was all done deliberately to try and stop me from on excess deaths. I tried every week for 9 months to get a debate on excess deaths, and it was only when I did an investigation into thalidomide, something that happened before I was born, and found out that it was withdrawn in 1961, but it was 1972 before the word thalidomide was allowed to be mentioned in the House of Commons. And it was down to, it was blamed on the Speaker. So I sent that to the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, and said, we don't want history repeating itself. And then mysteriously, after 9 months, he managed to find me a debate slot in 3 weeks. Um, and that first debate on excess deaths, there's no almost no MPs in the chamber, but the public gallery was absolutely rammed. And we had further debates in Westminster Hall and the main chamber over the next 6 months. Well, the public were amazing. And we made history because when I called for again for the vaccines, the mRNA vaccines to be suspended in human and animals, pending an independent inquiry into their safety and efficacy, the crowd behind the bulletproof glass in the public gallery were roaring, and it's never been heard like that in the chamber. In fact, the speaker, deputy speaker in the chair, threatened to clear the public gallery, which is hardly democracy. So there was the difference was there was no support in Parliament. And from the moment I spoke out about the vaccines, I was cancelled by the mainstream media. I was ostracised by people I thought were my friends. I had to eat all my meals on my own for 20 months. Any other workplace that would have been classed as bullying and harassment. But there are about 4,000 real people who work in Parliament. They're the cooks and the cleaners and the clerks and the security guards. And they were wonderful with me. They were 80% of them were completely for me. And the number of nights I walked out of Parliament and a cleaning lady who I'd never met before would look up and down the corridor, see it's only me. And the number of times I was pounced on, and they said they're all praying for me, keep going. It was amazing.
That must
And
have been
also the
an,
public support. I had hundreds of thousands of emails from all over the world, from the vaccine harmed, the vaccine bereaved, scientists who've been cancelled, doctors who've been cancelled, and and I knew because my colleagues knew. So many, I had the wives of colleagues coming to see me and tell me that I told him not to take it, and now he's got a heart condition, but he won't admit it, and he's not going to say anything. And that's why so many MPs stood down at the 2024 election. Um, when I was thrown out of the party formally, not one of my friends from Parliament even contacted me. Um, they do say that if you want a friend in politics, buy yourself a dog. I think it's probably true. But I did get a phone call from a US presidential candidate on my mobile within an hour, and it was Robert Kennedy Jr. from America, and he said it was disgusting what they were doing, and he said he'd back me. Um, and he's trying to do what he can in America now. He's
mm.
head of health and human services.
You must have felt completely alone because I
I didn't
watched
feel
you.
alone. Honestly, I didn't feel alone. I knew well, I wasn't alone because I was standing with the truth, and that's a pretty comfortable place to be, whatever the odds. Um, the public were amazing. I mean, they used to turn up for those debates, uh, and there was far too many people than can get in the public gallery in the House of Parliament. I used to have to go outside onto Parliament Square happily and give the people who couldn't get into the gallery, I give them a speech outside in Parliament Square every time. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people turned up.
What do you think the agenda? really was behind it. Because just
Well,
for
it
example,
is. Well, it is. Well, it's. I'm afraid I think it's depopulation. I've
mm,
come to the conclusion that the elites who run the world, and they do. I mean, anyone who thinks that any of our prime ministers, I've met the last 10 prime ministers we've had. And anybody thinks that they were ever running anything. I mean, so many things while I was in Parliament didn't add up. Uh, Good pieces of legislation that could make things better for the public were very hard to get through, and the bad stuff I was really working hard to try and stop it, and it was impossible. And I thought it sounds like it. This feels like a conspiracy. But I always looked at the people we'd got supposedly running the country, and they weren't bright enough to run a conspiracy.
mm.
It was only when I realized years later that it wasn't their conspiracy and they're just puppets, then it all dropped into place.
And is it the
Um,
people that we suspect and the think tanks that we all talk about, like the
well, they're all
W?
that they're in the pyramid of control, and the Freemasons and the Committee of 300 and the Bilderberg Group
Mm.
and the Club of Rome. Yes, but it comes down from people above them. And I think it's the World Economic Forum, but it's the people above them. And maybe it's always been like that, but now I know, and once you know, you can't unknow, quite honestly, and then everything drops into place. I remember saying to Cameron and Osborne in 2011, and I was no darling of theirs, I can assure you, that we don't need politics. All we need is good policies that make life better for the people, and then we'll get back in. And they looked at me and they said collectively that it was just, you don't understand, Andrew, it's just a game. And I guess I didn't understand in 2011, but I can promise you, I do understand now. And I
Mm.
think a lot of the people understand as well. Our
But
politics is basically a pantomime.
mm.
And it
Yes.
doesn't really matter who becomes the prime minister. They're all owned by the same people. And I kept getting rid of conservative prime ministers because they were doing things against the interests of the public. And that was David Cameron, and that was Theresa May, and it was Boris Johnson,
Mm.
and it was Rishi Sunak. And so they decided to get rid of me instead. And the rest is history.
So do you think that because people will typically look at the Rothschilds as being ultimately sat at the very top of the
Rothschilds,
pyramid of power?
Rockefellers, and there are
Mm.
other, the 13 original banking families names.
Mm.
People we probably don't know. And their shop front is the World Economic Forum. They've bought the United Nations. Any of these supranational bodies, the WHO, the World Health Organization, is part of the UN. That's completely under their control. And I think they've decided that with the advances in AI and robotics, they really don't need 90 odd percent. They only need enough of us for their own entertainment. And if you read Klaus Schwab's book, he's very clear. He wrote it more than 10 years ago, and he said that by 2050, the population of the world will be below a billion. So 7 out of 8 of us won't be here, and it'll be reduced by repeated pandemics, wars, and famines. And they're working on all of those all the time.
So do you think we're going to see another outbreak quite soon? So a lot of people are anticipating
They can
next
do
year.
whatever they want. I don't think people are going to fall for it too easily. They want digital ID in.
Mm.
That's lethal because too many people have woken up. And one thing about waking up is, yeah, I think it's very, very. I've not known anyone put back to sleep. But
Mm.
once they've woken up and seen the world for what it is, and when I realised, I mean, quite a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I mean, I went into a sort of period of mourning because it's uncomfortable in your 50s to find out that pretty much everything you thought you knew was wrong. And I've prayed more probably in the last 5 years than I've prayed all my life. And most of what I prayed for was that I was wrong, because life would be much simpler. But unfortunately, I'm not. So they've lied to us about net zero and man-made climate change, the myth around carbon dioxide
Mm.
emissions, human carbon dioxide production is driving global warming. There's no science behind that whatsoever. It's that they're all control measures, and the same people are making money out of all of the green energy scams that are behind the central banks who are allowed to print money, create money from nothing and charge interest for it. Well, I'm not surprised they're the richest people in the world if they can create something from nothing and then charge us interest on it. Um, it's this we're in a crazy way. The last 4 or 5 years really has been like living in a sort of ongoing horror movie for me.
Yeah, it's a bit like actually stepping into a 1984 and that Orwell was predicting the
Yeah.
future.
And once you go against the narrative, I mean you start becoming very unlucky. So, I've had my finances attacked, my assets attacked. Um, Unfortunately, my wife decided to leave me after I wouldn't take the bribe. Um, and
For that reason alone.
Well, she said I should have taken the bribe because I
Wow.
wasn't thinking of her and our son when I didn't take the bribe because everyone else had taken the bribe. I said I was thinking of a lot of things when I didn't take the bribe.
Yeah, doing the right thing by the sounds of it.
Yeah, but it feels like there weren't many in Parliament who didn't succumb. And these people we're talking about who are behind the plans for humanity, which I don't approve of. If they've got the ability to create money from nothing, it's like me bribing people with buckets of air. It doesn't matter how much I give, is it? I mean, that's the analogy. They have ultimate, and most people have a price. I would say also half the people who came to help me, either financially or with their time and effort, over the last 5 years since I spoke out. I mean, half of them turned out to be working for the other side, or were corrupted to work for the other side. So it's a difficult time, but I think people are waking up. That's why the governments around the world, and they're in lockstep again, are so desperate to bring in digital ID because once they've got that in, I mean, digital ID is a trap for us, and it's easier to avoid a trap than to try and get out of it once we're in it. And if we sign up to digital ID, if we say yes to that, we'll probably never be able to say no to our governments ever again because they'll have such control over us. It will be linked to a token system for money, a central bank digital currency. It'll be linked to a credit scoring system, um, which they've already got operating absolutely in China. Basically, the world's elites have decided that the model for humanity they want is the Chinese model, where
Mm.
corporations have huge power and people at the top can make a lot of money, have a very good life, and for the rest of us, it's controlled communism. That's what they've decided is the ideal model, and they're seeking to inflict it without ever having the permission of the populations of the so-called developed world. They've hammered us with the vaccines. They know that, and they're hammering us with taxation. They're deliberately sabotaging our economy. Um, and they know that poor, badly educated, ill people are far easier to control than people who are comfortably off, well educated and healthy. And they've ramped up the fear. Um, they've always got the option of taking us into a third world war, which would give them sweeping powers to push through the digital ID and would be another way of culling us off.
Do you
Um,
think that that's on the horizon?
yes, it is that if 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 Trump, for all his faults, if Trump hadn't beaten Kamala Harris, we were going to be at war with Russia last Christmas. That was the plan. The plan now is that I understand that they want Ukraine to fight on till next May. But the problem for them is that Ukraine can't fight on until next May. There won't be anything left of Ukraine by then, probably. Um, and America are reluctant. They'll sell us the weapons. The Americans have been very clear. They'll sell us the weapons as they did in the First and Second World War, so we can get ourselves into debt. Um, and Starmer signed us up into the European Defence and Securities Union, something I opposed. The conscription will be through the European Union. Even in the UK, though we left the European Union, it'll be Ursula von der Leyen who will be deciding when we get conscripted. It's males and females 16 to 35. That's why Starmer's bought in votes for 16-year-olds, because you can't ask people to die for the country if they have no say,
Right.
but they won't get a chance to vote because if we get into a war, you see, of course, they'll invoke Tony Blair's Civil Contingencies
Mm.
Act 2004, which will allow him to cancel elections detain people without trial. Do you think Starmer would like that? I think he's exactly what he'd like to do now. He's also pushing the public through the uncontrolled migration, which is actually being run by the government. Let's not beat around the bush.
Yeah.
I've produced evidence that they're recycling the dinghies. They're not even deflating them. They're taking them straight back to France to go straight back into the water. On government-sponsored lorries are picking the dinghies up and taking them back to France. And how, this smashed the gangs. How many gangs have they smashed? There's only
Mm.
one gang being smashed, and that was a gang that was smuggling people back to France who didn't want to stay in the UK anymore, and they've gone to prison. That's the only gang they've smashed.
Wow.
When
What
all the
what is it
source,
with
all the resources of the state, and I mean, it take about a week to infiltrate these people trafficking gangs and find out where the dinghies are being made and stop that supply and everything. But they don't want to because that's not what they want.
why is Tony Blair like herpes? You think it's gone, and then it just reappears. He's very much a force behind all of this, isn't he?
Well,
Still
you got to
now.
look at what Tony Blair, the first. Well, they're all on the same side. And I'm
Mm.
afraid if Nigel Farage becomes the Prime Minister, he won't be any different.
No, yeah, I
He's
can
in the
see that.
club. He's
Mm.
the approved candidate. Well, Blair's New Labour. I was interested in politics, but I wasn't involved in '97. Uh, Only an observer. Look back. The first thing that Tony Blair's New Labour government passed, the most important piece of legislation they wanted to get through, was never in their manifesto. The first thing they did, they took the death penalty out of the Treason Act. They knew they were going to committing treason, and every prime minister since has committed treason, conspired with powers outside the country against the interests of the people. In fact, it's high treason because they're on the public payroll, so it's classed as high treason against the people. And that was the most important piece of legislation that Tony Blair wanted to get in after 17 years out of office for the Labour Party. And looking back with hindsight now, many things have dropped into place. Many things have dropped into place under both Labour and Conservative governments or coalition governments.
I think Dolores Cannon predicted his arrival, and the more I've looked into Tony Blair, I'm not religious as such, but the more I've looked into Tony Blair, the more I'm thinking this man actually appears to be more like the
Well,
Antichrist.
look at his face. Look at his face and how it affected him. I mean, I describe him as a face. He's got a face. Blair's got a face like a devil sick of sin, hasn't he?
It all ties up, doesn't it?
We're in for a
Apparently,
bumpy ride, Guy.
yes.
There is going to be a time when the people are going to have to stand up. The future they've got outlined for us is horrendous. If we give in to digital ID, the two things we've got to hold on is no digital ID, and that makes life uncomfortable. But if we give away that freedom, we're not only giving our freedom away, we're giving our children, our grandchildren, and future generations of our nation, yet unborn's freedom away. They'll never know the freedom we gave away from it. It's not ours to give away. So we must fight for that, and we've got to keep ourselves out of a major war, which will give the government the ability. I think they actually want us to get into civil disorder. So they again
Yes.
they could implement the Civil Contingencies Act, and they're provoking the public on a regular basis with the outrages we're seeing, affecting mainly women and girls, but also general citizens. And that's coming from the uncontrolled, unregulated, unchecked migration into the country.
What do you think the purpose of these military serving young men entering the
Well,
country illegally is?
they're guns for hire. They will do
Ah,
anything
so
for whichever
good to hear
government.
that.
They will do what. I mean, at the end of the day, if they say, well, put this jacket on
Yeah.
and this helmet and work for us and do whatever we want, and we'll give you a passport, they're there, aren't they? And we'll let
I'm
you bring
so
your family in.
I've been saying this for a long time, and I'm so pleased. Obviously, I'm not pleased that it's happening, but I'm pleased to hear it confirmed because people have been telling me that I'm wrong, and I've said there is a
When you're running away, when the people are fleeing war, normally the men stay and sort the mess out, and you send the women, the elderly, and the children. When you're going to war, the men go of fighting age, and all 90 odd percent of the migrants coming across are men of fighting age. It that's the logic, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. I think it's no coincidence
We're
that
in
we're not seeing.
we are. I know you're not religious, but we are in biblical times. It is an amazing time to be alive. Things are being disclosed, and the elites have made mistakes. They haven't got everything right, have they?
So do you think that this is Satan's little season, that we are at end times?
Well, the people we're up against have corrupted some good people originally. And I've looked into the face of those who've betrayed the British public. I mean, in February 2023, after I'd stopped them jabbing the babies in the UK and been punished for it, there is a saying in Parliament, no good deed goes unpunished for long.
Mm,
Um, and I was ostracized. No one's talking to me. And then the chap who got me into politics, I'd known him for 30 years, so 15 years before politics. He came and put his arm around me and whispered in my ear, and I thought, it's my old friend. And he said, Andrew, you can speak out about the vaccines as much as you want to, but you are vaccinated. That means you will be dead of cancer soon. Laughed and walked off.
what?
And that was in February 2023. These are evil people, or they've corrupted people. There is no humanity in them.
And
And
had
a
you
lot of
been
people can't get their
vaccinated?
head around how could anyone seek out to murder babies and children? Well, and that makes it unbelievable. But I mean, these people have no humanity in them.
Mm.
It's gone.
Do you think with some of them it was never there to start with?
I think they've selected some psychopaths and sociopaths. Yes, undoubtedly. Um, yeah,
A lot of people.
they've selected the people. I mean, that's why Parliament is so, I think, isolated from the public. And all I ever see is there's more armed security guards, and the fences got higher and higher every year. Uh, there's a reason for that, and also there's a reason why when I walk the streets anywhere in the UK, people will always come up to me and shake my hand and say, "Well done, thank you for what you did." And yet, former prime ministers who had the ability to do great things for this nation, they have to have bodyguards for the rest of their lives.
Mm.
If the public really knew what they'd done to them, they wouldn't. The bodyguards wouldn't be enough, I can assure you.
Do you think that this will all come out eventually?
Everything comes out eventually, but if we don't bring it out soon, if they get the
Mm.
20 years they want, they will have perpetrated so many other crimes against us that it'd be academic. Um, they're very nervous because this is the best chance we've got. We've never had a chance before. I think it's been like this for millennia, but for the first time, we're actually in the game and we have got a chance. And they don't like us having a chance. And we've
No,
got to grab it for our sake and for the future generations, because actually it's on our watch. Um, but we're not all going to make it. But the
no.
alternative is unpalatable.
Do you think then that we're going to see? I mean, obviously we know male suicide in particular has gone through the roof. I've lost 5 friends in the last few years,
Well,
and
hot
and a
suicide's
cousin.
gone through the roof because of the psyop. Effectively, we've been in a psychological warfare for the last 6 years. We've probably been programmed a lot longer than that. And if there's any mitigation for MPs, I mean, they really hammered the MPs with the psyop, obviously because it's a better return for them, and the public were damaged enough. So we're in for a bumpy ride. It's going to have to get. I think they'll take us right up to the brink of a nuclear war, try and put the fear into us, and people then will agree to anything.
Mm,
You're always going to ask to be given away your freedoms for security and convenience.
yeah,
And anybody who's willing to give freedom up for supposed security will end up with neither security nor freedom. And the only convenience is that the state will be able to control every aspect of our lives. And not in my name. So I'll be
yeah.
standing.
They normally, at times like 9/11 or the pandemic, they introduce emergency steps and laws and legislation,
They
but
never
they
go
never,
back. They
never, yeah,
never repeal them. No,
absolutely,
there's no law I've ever seen go through where a government didn't exploit it to the full extent. So when people tell you what the fears are around digital ID, that is the government's always exploit it to the full extent. And once again, from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, here, governments are in lockstep. And whenever governments are in lockstep, just like the pandemic, it's never good for the people. There's currently a law. I mean, Mark Carney was actually in the UK when Starmer announced mandatory digital ID being introduced. The day after he announced it for Canada, there's current legislation in Canada before their parliament and three separate bills, which, if they go through, will give the government the power that if you say something that they don't like, they have the ability to cut you off from the mobile phone network and the internet. right? And you don't have to have committed a crime. The government decide that you've said something they don't like. And if you tell anyone what the government have done to you, you will then have committed a criminal offence. That's legislation that's currently before the Canadian Parliament.
Oh,
And
wow.
Carney's just coaxed two so-called Conservative MPs to defect to him. So he's got the votes to actually get that through now.
Crikey, my eldest son actually lives in Vancouver. He works for a bank, and he's said over there that it's really starting to they're starting to tighten the thumb screws.
And they've been having, and I think they've got a population of about 40 million, 40 odd million in Canada. They've been having a million. They had a million migrants into the country in the
Yeah,
first 6 months of this year. So
and
yeah, and we've seen what's happening in Ireland. We've seen what's happening in Europe. Um, yeah, it's worldwide. They know that it's the Anglosphere, the people who, the indigenous population of the Anglosphere, are probably going to put up the most resistance. That's why they're hammering us. But we will put up the resistance, I promise you.
my a couple of people have told me, my son included, that actually he's seen convoys. They've seen convoys of Amazon lorries being driven and filled with migrants.
I haven't heard that, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, the migrant problem is being created, and
Mm,
then whatever problems the government create over the next few years, I promise you, I already know what their answer will be: digital ID,
yes,
digital ID.
absolutely. Yes, and I've had this argument with so many people, and they're saying, well, it's good for, you know, it's good for actually detecting illegal immigrants. And my argument was, illegal immigrants are under the radar. They don't have ID now.
Well, if they're saying you won't be able to work unless you've got digital ID, well, we've all got national insurance numbers, and
Mm,
illegal migrants haven't got national insurance numbers.
exactly.
So one would presume, if we just institute the law we've got, is have you got a national insurance number? No, well, you can't work.
Mm,
There's no need for any of this. Um, but it's already, I mean, I think they've got the digital IDs through the one login system of 11 million Brits already. Are they going to do the company directors and shareholders
yes.
through Companies House? And at the end, all they have to do is put the data together in one place. But I mean, today we had the internet out, and apparently people couldn't pay bills, they couldn't pay on their cards. X was down. I mean, this just demonstrates the dangers of relying on a technology which can be hacked or fail, and then you just won't be able to buy food
Mm.
or
What
do
do you?
anything or travel anywhere. So, I mean, cash is quite good. So people should please carry on using cash. Use as
Mm,
much cash as you possibly can. I'm very scathing on businesses that don't take cash anymore. I won't give them
yes.
my custom if I have the choice.
Yes.
Um, but finally, I mean, I just want to say that this is the best chance we've got. Wake as many people up as gently as possible. It is, you can't force someone to be awake. It's like, you can drag someone to church and make them listen to a sermon, but you can't make them believe in God, can you?
No.
So, wake them up as gently as possible and be sympathetic. But we need as many people on board because the day of reckoning is a fast approaching. And also try and be positive because negativity, depression, that just plays into the hands of those who are plotting against us.
Yeah.
Um, and if you told me 15 years ago when I went into politics that I'd be giving a little sermon speech like this to you today, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I'd have said you're absolutely bonkers. But here we are. We're living in very, very strange times.
We are, and I know you've got to go now. So just want to say thank you so much for giving up your time, and people need to, they really need to follow your work. So I'll put a link in to your channel. I mean, you've got over 43,000 subscribers on your YouTube channel, so I'll put a
and
link
that's
in.
and that hasn't been opened up for a year. That was I've got 326,000 on X, and my Facebook had to be revamped, so it's only about 3 months old. That's got 90,000 already.
I'll put
Um,
links
there's
into
a,
those as well.
there's clearly an appetite for the truth and
Mm,
for enlightenment. So that shows that people are still waking up. But keep the faith. I've got confidence that we're going to get through this, and when we're through it, we'll be able to build something rather better than we had before.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
so too.
and uh, and so God bless.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much, Andrew, for your time, and thanks for sharing that information with us. It's not people on my channel won't normally hear this. A lot of them are in America and overseas, so I think they needed to hear what you had to say, and I appreciate you doing it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care, and bye for now, Andrew.
Bye bye.